Welcome to the David Spisak Show. I'm so thankful that you've taken the time to join me. And this is something that I think, and I apologize for geeking out a bit here, but it is a rare occasion when I get to have a conversation, an extended conversation, or a part two, a sequel, if you will, with a guest. But because the subject matter is so important, it's so timely, it's so much on the top of minds for dealers everywhere today, as well as vendors. And that is cybersecurity and the risk that comes along with all of this fantastic technology that we benefit from on a daily basis. So this is kind of the dark side, the tough side of technology. But I'm so lucky to have Justin Shanken back with us. And Justin is the CEO of Black Breach. And Justin, first and foremost, I want to thank you for taking the time to come back to be able to continue the conversation. Because last time we talked about the obvious, right? The elephant in the room, which was, hey, the biggest cyber attack we've ever seen in the industry. Unfortunately, it landed at the headquarters of CDK, and they've had to deal with so much since then. They've done an admirable job of getting people back online. But at this point now, both CDK as well as the industry at large is dealing with the aftermath. And I really want to touch on that and get your expert feedback so that everybody listening can learn what should they be doing right now? What should they be looking for? What should they change? What should they consider moving forward to protect themselves at the highest level? So thank you, first and foremost, for joining.
Well, thank you for having me again. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you. So let's start with this. Before we had jumped in to start our conversation, interestingly, you had just had a conversation with a dealer. We're not going to mention who, but what was the nature of that conversation? I think it's important because for anybody who's not familiar with the term CISO, it's a Chief Information Security Officer. And in big corporations, that's a huge position. You've got the CTO, you got the CIO, Information Officer, but this is the security officer whose job is to make sure there aren't breaches to the greatest degree possible. So one of the things that an association of CISOs happened to mention is, in a result of a survey of 400 of them, was that over 60% of the time when there's a breach, it happens again. And it happens commonly when there is a ransom paid. So everybody's hoping, for CDK's sake and for their team, that they're done with that unfortunate nonsense. But it's a reality. And so with that as just a jumping off point, would you mind sharing about the nature of the conversation you just had with the dealer?
Yeah, I think it's very positive, or very pertinent, to kind of discuss this now. So CDK we're kind of on the back end of that. We just kind of said that everything's kind of getting wrapped up, but there are going to be, and what we're already seeing are some anomalies. And I want to encourage everyone that's listening to this, because this came from the dealership space. We do cover other areas, but this is hyper-focused in dealers, that essentially don't look past these anomalies. One of the problems I used to have when we used to do investigations for espionage cases and other cases is we would come after the fact, and people would always say the same thing. They'd always say, oh, I heard that and it was weird at the time, or we saw that and it was weird at the time, but I didn't think to report it. I didn't think to say something. And then these things start to stack up. This is a very similar situation. So in this case, I have one of our dealers, of course, we'll not say who, that is starting to see a huge influx. They were a CDK. They were part of this. They were a victim underneath all this of phishing attacks. But the catch is they're not just phishing attacks. People can say, oh, okay. These are actually what we call whaling. And what whaling is, and in this case, they were targeted. Usually, cybersecurity criminals are relatively lazy, right? They want to just get the biggest bang, the fastest bang for their buck. Essentially, in this case, when you get to whaling, they take the time to learn about you. And that's where it gets dangerous. So let's talk about what happened in this. Essentially, they saw an increase of emails coming from their credit entities that they did use. Not from a bank they didn't use. That gets more into the phishing where it gets generic. And I won't even say who it was, but it was and it was designed and built to look exactly like that credit company, all right, that credit institution. And it wasn't real. It's what we call credential harvesting. And what that means is we have the backstopping, we make it look, we do this in penetration testing all the time. And if you fill it out and you give us your credentials and don't know better, you then submit to me the whole kit and caboodle. And many of times after you hit the submit button, we link you to the actual real site. So it flashes back up at the real site and you go, weird, I submitted, but I'll just do it again. And you don't think anything of it. And then you go into the real site the second time. And so what they've noticed was a huge increase in their dealership of folks that just had this. It was actually something that they offered through the dealership. And the only people targeted were the people with that. And so a lot.
Can I interject just real quick? So I don't want to assume that everybody has the same level of experience, awareness, acumen, or understanding when it comes to some of these things that you're touching on, which are at times very sophisticated. I think that most of us are familiar with the term phishing, right? PHI, phishing.
Sure.
But would you mind, before you continue on, just for the benefit of it, what, Justin, is the difference exactly between a phishing attack and a whaling campaign or approach?
Great question. So usually there's kind of a hierarchy here. Phishing, spear phishing. You've probably heard of spear phishing, right? And then whaling. And they build up in increased levels of threat. Phishing is generally very unsophisticated. You may receive a $25 gift card to a thing, or speaking, you've probably seen something like this, or something from Bank of America about your account, but you say, I don't even have Bank of America. It's not even correct, right? And frankly, it still works, right? But it's in mass and it's very nasty shootout. Just see what you get back.
The shotgun approach.
It's very shotgun approach.
Most of us at some point have gotten that email that gave us all the tremendous news that a prince in Africa has got $1 billion, but he doesn't have a bank account. He needs our help. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just that proverbial shot in the dark, so to speak. Is that what phishing is?
Yes, for the most part. It's a little bit more targeted where they do try to, get your emails and take that information. But for the most part, very shotgun. Spear phishing
versus whaling. Okay, spear phishing.
Let's talk just for a moment about spear phishing. It's basically the next level up. But whaling, which we're going to kind of skip to, is the scariest. And the reason is because of time. There's a level of effort that it takes for me to identify David Spisak's accounts, right? What do you even have? I don't know this through this, right? But I have to take the time of looking either on your social engineering or, in this case, unfortunately, probably on the dark web. So if there is packages of information, and if it did come from, I don't know if it could come from CDK or not, but we're looking for those things because that's usually the next step, unfortunately, to monitor the dark web, which we do for our clients. We look at those. Then they take that information and they have basically the secret sauce. Oh, I know I can get them on this, whether at a bank, usually something with accounting, with some type of information, invoicing, it goes on and on and on, credit, etc. Those are the best. Those are the best things you can get your hands on. Then I have to make a website that is fraudulent, essentially, but it needs to look exactly like what I'm targeting. That takes time and money and skill. So that's a little scary. Then it almost feels like you have a break-in in your home, right? Like, wow, someone took the time. It's very creepy feeling, right? Someone took the time to learn this about me and then came after me. Now, at the end of the day...
But to time out, it's almost like at times, and this is what typically happens in these ransomware attacks. Imagine they broke into your home, they learned everything about you, and then left.
Yeah.
And now they're planning on when to come back. And when they come back, they're fully armed to do major damage. Is that fair?
It is. And in fact, I'll take it one step further. Usually if they break in, they leave something, what we call a back door. So they can come back, right? And this unfortunately happened. You had made a really good point earlier of people or victims of ransomware falling victims again, because what usually happens is they leave a backdoor in there that they can either sell access to someone else that wants to utilize that, or they themselves wait a little while. They're not going to hit you back to back, right? Because frankly, they want you to claim your insurance. They want to, I mean, it's kind of like thinking, ooh, who's the victim here? And within 6 months, 8 months, or maybe even a year later, making the rotation and then jumping back in.
So Justin, one of the things that has come up, and this has been such a, it's been unprecedented in every way, but it's really caused people, I think, to have a much more heightened awareness of cybersecurity, which is a good thing. And it's a shame that CDK is the one who's has to pay the price, the big price for this. But, when you think about this, and you just mentioned something about, the potential of getting attacked again, one of the things you hear all the time about these ransom situations, and CDK reportedly paid $25 million. And people will say, you don't have to worry about your data because, these are good criminals. These are professional criminals with high integrity. So if you pay them the money, they're not going to harm your data. That's what you hear. However, when you kind of dig in, you also hear that ransom as a service oftentimes starts with one organization who is the one that actually has the breach. They made the breach. They got in. They planted that malware, that backdoor, so to speak. Sometimes it lays in wait for weeks or months. And then they sell that opportunity, for lack of a better term, to the ransom side of the equation, those ransom organizations. Is that true?
Absolutely. So we've talked about ransomware as a service a little bit before, but there was one thing I've kind of left off with this is what kind of unfortunately happens the very last part. So if ransomware as a service sells the opportunity, like you said, and then an entity buys said opportunity, and then that entity utilizes said opportunity, right? They conduct the ransomware, they shut it down. Many times before they go through that, they leave a backdoor because they don't want to pay again to the ransomware as a service folks. They leave a sophisticated backdoor in that so they can just go directly back in. Now,
so that, Justin, don't I then potentially, and I'm sorry, but this is so interesting and I think so important for people to understand. So what you're saying though is that the company that initially did the breach, that did the hack successfully, they have a backdoor.
They have the original.
It was needed in order to be able to put that on. There's literally, for folks listening, apparently I wasn't aware of this, a marketplace, if you will.
Yes.
Think of it almost like what was that? TaskRabbit. That service TaskRabbit. You need somebody to clean your garage or cut your lawn. You put on TaskRabbit, and somebody goes, "Okay, I'll take that." Or Uber. Mm-hmm. So imagine a marketplace like that, or like Uber, where somebody says, "I'll take that one." Oh, CDK, I'll take that one. But the company I just bought that from, I bought the rights to that, so to speak. They have a backdoor. And what you're saying is now I put a backdoor because if something was to come up, I don't want to pay them again.
That's exactly.
So now, if I'm the company who's contending with this nonsense, I have potentially two backdoors that I have to contend with. Is that accurate?
In theory, I don't want to oversimplify it. I just want to discuss, because it can be, when you say backdoor, that could be many things, right? We're using very general terminology here. But essentially, the folks that buy these usually and execute the attack and negotiate the attack and the ransom don't want, like you just said, they'll leave something in it in a back door. They're sophisticated. They have capabilities themselves. But remember, it takes floor after floor of people. And we've got videos of it, of many of these locations where it's floor after floor of people just hitting targets nonstop. And that is a level of infrastructure and resource that many of these other entities don't want to pay for. And if I just find what I really do want, whatever that target is, whether it's the financial sector, whether it's the United States or the European Union or Ukraine, or it could be geopolitical, it could be monetary, it could be many things. But when I do decide that and attack that, I want to give myself the opportunity to do it again. And so one of the things that we have, and you can find this with certain organizations, is what we call a compromise assessment, where we've even got a tool we've developed in-house to look for these, to look for what we call 0 days or back doors. Now, 0 day is a little different term for those out there. You call 0 day or O day, so nobody throws a rock at me. But basically,
no day for those. What is no day?
An O day and 0 day, I'm going to tell you, are the same thing. And they are, frankly, something that's never been seen before in the wild. That's why it's a 0 day. No one's seen it. Now, let's understand what that really means, though, because I like to put the behavior and the business side of it. And I think that's what helps people. I'm flattered when people say, hey, you could speak English to me about cyber. I get it. This is one of those things. So think about it like business. To develop a 0 day is like a silver bullet, okay? When you develop a silver bullet, you can only use that thing once, because the minute you use it and it gets exposed, you may get what you need, but it's going to be patched. That's the whole point. So you don't want to waste that silver bullet. It could cost them God knows how much to develop that capability. And many times those things are used, like the Fed, I believe, what was it? The Fed that was just hacked, and some of these other governmental, that would be something usually you'd see a 0 day on, right? Something military or DOD, but not always. Could go to something bigger like Microsoft, et cetera. But you wouldn't see that on a mom and pop. One thing that we're constantly looking for in an initiative that we have, because we work with government organizations because of my background and when it's the right thing to do, is if we come across things that have never been seen in the wild, a 0 day or O day, we report those, do forensics on them, and realize at what extent could this be. So we have a capability that we've developed, and it's still in some infancy, but for the most part, it works on Windows systems where we can find unknowns. So there's many things out there, many operations and processes, et cetera, that are known. We know that. Windows knows it. Mac knows it, Linux, et cetera. But when you find something that has no idea what it is, that's very scary. Now, it may be something you developed in your own place, and we look at it and go, oh, it's your thing, but it definitely needs a look.
So if I can, and this has been so interesting, but I want you now to kind of tailor this back. Kind of frame that within where we are right now on the, hopefully the backside for CDK of this unfortunate attack. But I want you to really hyper-focus on dealers, okay? And you work with dealers right now, right? And you work with big entities, government entities, but you also work with dealers. If I'm a dealer, and if I'm a dealer right now, whether I'm a CDK dealer or frankly, if I'm a dealer of any other DMS, it doesn't change the fact that my brain is shifted. And I'm thinking, okay, am I adequately protected from my end? And, understanding that if we use Microsoft or if we use Mac, we expect those companies to do what they're supposed to do to minimize the likelihood that something's going to end up impacting me. And it's the same for our DMS companies. So for those CDK dealers, there are dealers out there going, I got to consider making a move because I don't have the level of confidence or trust. But there's other CDK dealers going, I've been with them for a long time. I'm not going anywhere. And frankly, I think it's far safer to stay with them because they just got attacked. They're not going to get attacked again. Once a plane had a maintenance issue or a company had an issue, then I think it lessens the likelihood it happens again. Who's right? Who's wrong? I don't know. I think it's more complicated than that. But then you get to the dealer level, and I still have compliance that I have to do, right? I still have GLBA for Leach Wiley to contend with. I still have FTC to comply with these heightened compliance requirements. And regardless of what happens with any vendor, I'm still responsible. So I want to protect my business. I don't want to get knocked offline. I don't want to have an issue with my customers. What should we be doing today now that we've gotten past the CDK dealers are back online? What should they be doing? What should all dealers be doing?
Well, yeah, let's talk about that because it's multi-layered, right? First, listening to this podcast, educating ourselves that it's important. I think that there's been a culture that's starting to spread in a positive way since the CDK. This is kind of the good takeaway, that since the attack, dealers, because we work a lot in dealers, have really struggled with, why do I need this? Why is FTC stating this? We're doing these things. We don't have anything. We're too small. I've heard all the different excuses. And frankly, that's just not true. So the very first thing I would say is just educating ourselves with what cybersecurity is and the difference between that and IT. I've discussed that before, and what IT security is, what my expectation should be moving forward, and the appropriate need for the investment to limit my liability. One thing that's been very positive that's come out of this in crisis is the opportunity that's fallen out of crisis is simply the fact that everyone would say, hey, if you're hit with ransomware, you're going to be down and it's going to cost you this much. And we don't even talk about, we're just talking about the cost of being down. And look what's happening with CrowdStrike. That's not even ransomware, but they're down essentially. So there's many ways to be down.
And there was, just to be clear to everybody, so there's no misunderstanding. The CrowdStrike issue was a patch, was an update that went wrong, and it has nothing to do with cybersecurity whatsoever.
Yeah, except they are a cybersecurity company.
So that's the irony is everybody uses CrowdStrike to protect yourself, and then a what should have been a simple something they've done 1,000 times according to the CEO, a Microsoft update went bad and it knocked everybody offline.
It is, but
there wasn't any nefarious.
My COO this morning said it best to me. It's very scary to think if this were, and it wasn't, but if this were a criminal organization that got involved in this, how much access they would have. How much, you see how widespread this is. Yeah.
Banks, hospitals, airlines. I mean, it's dealerships, governments, dealerships. Yeah.
All right. Getting back to what you were saying earlier. So the first thing is education. The second thing at this point,
train your people is no matter what their level of expertise. You're saying, Justin, train your people.
And frankly, I'm saying train yourself. Educate yourself on this, right? It's not about your people. If you're a key leader, a stakeholder on this, understand the need for cybersecurity, the differences, and then having the right partner. The second thing that's been great, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier before we got a little distracted, my fault on the CrowdStrike, is that it used to be if you're down. Now, so many people were down, or they know a dealer friend that was down. We have those numbers calculated. We know that cost now. It used to be before it'd all be an assessment, right? Maybe about this much. How many cars do you sell? Now we know just by either proximity or by your own suffering under, unfortunately, the CDK incident and what the cost of that is. One day down pays for a good service. 3, you have to get in front of the threat first. You're going to have to invest in these things ahead of time and the proper things. Make sure that you're doing the right thing by that. 5 would be essentially knowing the dark web, being in tune, talking to your people about if you're seeing anomalies, we are all on a platter right now. Whether it from ransomware like Black Suit, which they've already used in the vendor space and they may use in other dealers. We've actually seen it in some other space too in dealers. Or what can be the offshoot of what happens on the dark web, that data, that leaking, the stuff that we talked about being sold there. And all those things combined lead to a new dealership tomorrow. Data is important.
So Justin, one of the many things I get from that is the fact that you got to be intentional, you got to be serious, and you have to really understand the cost of when your business is down for a day. So while the investment on the surface may seem expensive, the question you got to ask yourself is, if that investment essentially amounts to the equivalent of being down one day out of 365, would you do it? Or one day out of 365 times 2, 3, 4, 5 years, of course you would. The second thing is almost similar to post 9/11, where the saying, if you see something, say something,
Yes,
was created. And as it pertains to these anomalies, and again, for those listening, an anomaly is simply something that, whether it's a phishing, a spear phishing, or whaling campaign, to where it used to be that you would say, hey, don't click on links. Whatever you guys do, don't click on links inside of our network. Okay. Well, most of those emails for years just looked like it looked ridiculous. It said it's from FedEx and the logo was all janked up and fuzzy, and you could tell. Most of us learned long ago, first thing you got to do is click on that return address. And if you end up seeing something that's obviously not from FedEx or from Apple, from your bank, you'll notice something funky in that address line. But life's changed. And not only is there more sophistication that allows people to get into these systems and as you said, have literally floors of people constantly looking for ways to find targets and attack those targets. But when you look at those emails, some of them now, holy cow, you could stick them side by side and you can't tell the difference. So it really requires that training you're saying to heighten people's awareness. And then if you see something, say something. If you get something like that, make sure that you take notice of that and serve it up to your IT person, right? Or your CIO or your CISO, so that the appropriate action can be taken. You agree with all that?
I do. I would add just a couple things. One, if you do receive something and you're questioning its authority, never call what's there. So for example, if it does come from a FedEx or a credit company or whatever, Google the FedEx number. Google, do not take what's on that and then verify that. The other thing I want to say is the difference of what the FTC regulations for safeguards states and your protection under what this is all called social engineering, by the way. These attacks, this whole umbrella of attacks is called social engineering. Unfortunately, social engineering is not covered in the FTC safeguards. It does not mention anywhere the word phishing once. And that's hard to, because it's such a common thing. Now they will say, well, wait a second, it's a complete program or this or that. And we do phishing training and phishing simulated phishing attacks. Well, that's good for training. But actually, we have an offering that we do with Black Breach, and it doesn't fall under FTC. Unfortunately, it's the next level up. But we actually can find behaviors and stop this. We see behaviors. It's not spam. It's not those types of products that are spam. It's nothing like that. But there is a way to get in front of these, and we can tell these two people have never spoke before, and now they're talking about money. And even though I think you're David and you look like David to me, we can look and tell that this has an extra dot, an extra dash. We know that they're not the same. And we pull that in and visually look at it, let alone if you talk about wiring. These people have never spoke before, and now they're talking about money. Whoop, big alert. It comes to us and we're able to do that. So there are sophisticated ways to get in front of it, but it still requires an investment.
Justin, when you mentioned that something that's not covered under safeguards, what does that mean to me as a dealer? Why does it matter?
Well, I think many people are very compliance driven. Okay. Whether it not just cybersecurity, but all sorts of different compliance that the dealerships are under. It's a lot. And there's a cost to those compliance, and it's a gripe, right? Oh man, I got to pay for this or deal with that. The other thing that we usually have with the compliance piece is, all right, I did it. I paid for it. We're covered, right? And unfortunately, with the FTC's first step, now we've already seen an evolution, right, of FTC now stating if you are a victim of a breach, you have to self-report. That's a new piece. And I do believe in the post-CDK world with the attack, we're about to see some more probably under vendor management because CDK was a vendor. and some more maybe about phishing and social engineering. But I think what does confuse a lot of people, and what would confuse me, frankly, is if I invested in a company like Blackbreach and they come in and we go, we took care of all your FTC, you're good. You would go, I'm good. Well, unfortunately, you're good for this compliance box of what you wanted to do. But if you're going to take the number one distribution method for Black Suit, for that ransomware that hit them, is phishing. Now, they had 3 or 4 others, but the number one was through social engineering, essentially.
So does that mean the company that I'm working with to protect me, if they say, hey, what we do is we protect you to make sure that you're 100% compliant, check, done, here's your money, thank you for doing that, I could sleep at night. The reality is, hold up, doesn't cover you from social engineering, doesn't cover you, for example, from spear phishing or from phishing in general.
And certain other
literally
too.
You literally could have checked the box, paid the money, and been FTC compliant, and yet still have the potential of major exposure from a breach perspective, or exposure in terms of protecting your customer data. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think I would say it like this. Just because you're 100% compliant does not make you 100% safe.
Love that.
Right? Okay. That's the simplest way I can put it. So just because I'm compliant with these regulations does not mean that I'm 100% safe. Now, we have different vectors to attack all sorts of different ways that we attack all these different threats and address them. But what we see in a lot of dealerships, and not just dealerships, but other areas, they go, what's the compliance? What's the cost? I want to be compliant. I want to do the right things. But just because you're compliant doesn't make you 100% safe. And so I know that's unfortunate that we make one investment into that. And I don't want people to think, oh, it's just a hole we keep throwing money into, because frankly, there is a level that there's a diminishing returns like anything else that's right. But it does still require investment, and to do it correctly.
Oh, I apologize, but we've got about 10 minutes left, and there's a few things I want to make sure we cover.
Sure.
Because you had mentioned at least 5 steps there, but there's a couple things that I want to touch on so that people understand. So once they train their people, they increase awareness, they understand these anomalies and what to look for and what to do. There's some other steps. One of the things that really came out of this that was glaring was that we probably as an industry didn't think enough about how our businesses would function offline. Coming from California, I remember that we always would have a plan for the family that if there was ever a major earthquake that knocked out cell service, and we couldn't get each other on our cell, no texting, no phone, this is what we're doing. Here's where we're meeting. Everybody go here, right? There is a plan. How do we function? How do we communicate offline? I think that coming out of this, it's been a big lesson that we need to be much better prepared at how to have our businesses function effectively offline, and how to continue to do what we can to protect our data and our businesses offline. That's number one. Number two, there's an organization called Security Boulevard that had reported on this, or had kind of done an assessment. And one of the things that they mentioned was checking lateral access. And that's another term that I had never really heard before. Most of us probably haven't. But basically what it means is they said that once these guys hacked into CDK system or any system, they moved laterally inside there. And again, I mentioned the monolithic architecture, which allows that, versus a microservice, which disallows that. But that's why you want to check. If somebody gets into your network, can they move laterally to get into other places? And if so, you got to figure out a way to compartmentalize those. That's one thing. Two is you got to make sure that you review the incident response plan that you have and consider your stakeholders, right? One stakeholder, the most important one, undoubtedly is our clients, right? And so how do I notify them? How do I protect them post-breach, or how do I protect them from a breach? The other one is, internally. And the other thing that these guys happen to mention that I thought was interesting, I really want to get your take here. So what they said is once the first breach occurred, CDK rushed. You may remember they mentioned there was a cyber incident that happened on the evening of the 18th. And then on the 19th, that afternoon, they stated, we're already working and we're getting systems back online. This particular group said, when that first occurred, CDK rushed to get back online for the right reasons. They want to take care of their customers. But they said in their estimation, that was one of their biggest mistakes because immediately the cyber criminals were then able to attack again. You may remember there was a second attack. When the cyber criminals were able to attack again, they were able to access even more consumer data. And a client accurately compared this to a doctor stitching up a wound without first removing the debris, meaning had they cleared everything, cleaned everything, and checked everything before putting the system back online, they could have avoided the second attack. Now, I think that's hypothecation. I don't think there's any way to prove that. I think that somebody's saying what they're saying. And, I'm sure that will be fodder for lawsuits. There's already been 10 or 12 lawsuits. There will be many more. I don't like them. I don't agree with a lot of them because honestly, if you were really, big time harmed, I get it. But there's some of those lawsuits that just appear to be a bit frivolous and like they're just chasing money, in my humble opinion. But I would really like you to speak to a couple things. One is lateral. How do I protect myself? How do I protect myself laterally? How do I do that? And two, how important is my incident response plan? What should it include? Those are the two I'd like to wrap up with.
Sure. Well, let's talk about lateral movement. Lateral movement is what an MDR protects against. Okay. So lateral movement is what, what a good tool and what continuous monitoring with a SOC would do. So funny enough, that tool could be CrowdStrike, right? That's why we were laughing because that's literally what that's for. SentinelOne, et cetera. There's a lot of big players in that space. But I want to tell you a little secret that a lot of people don't know. With many of those tools, they identify an alert on lateral movement. They're built around that. And what lateral movement means for those of you that don't know, because I don't think we explained it very well yet, is that when I'm in one account and I hack that account, that person, right? I go in, David, I hack yours, but I want to get to Justin's because he's the domain admin and that has all the keys. I'm not just going in, I'm going across, and we don't do that in networks. It's a very odd thing, right? You're not hopping into mine. Only certain people with certain access.
It's actually the antithesis of the way things are supposed to work.
Exactly, right? So that's why it's called lateral movement. So all the bells and whistles and alarms are designed to catch that. Let me tell you what they're not very well designed to catch when we break in. So I can break in and sit and move very slowly. And that's how we beat the system, frankly. And so what happens...
So when somebody hacks then, and you hear that they could sit in there and do nothing for weeks or months, are they essentially doing that to where they're just laying in wait for an opportunity?
It could
to gain that additional access?
Many times, frankly, it's because of too many opportunities. So for example, if I fish 1,000 companies and I'm successful in 800, I am one human. 800's a lot. That's a big number. It may take me another 4 months to get back to that first one. And we've seen that. We've seen where things have sat. That's why I was talking to you earlier about, we actually were talking about the back doors. This is another great example. I'm not familiar with the article you're talking about. I do want to be careful because I don't have any inside knowledge on CDK. I do have a lot of knowledge on these types of attacks though, but I was not intimately involved with that.
I would actually just caution people when you read all these articles, they're interesting. It causes you to think about things. I don't think you should take them as Bible because the reality is nobody who's talking about the details of the attack, what happened, what CDK should have done, could have done, would have done, it's hypothecation, right? They weren't there.
We won't need to
and
discovery,
and
lawsuits, investigations, that
Right.
these things may come to light or may
right.
not. They
So
may
I
be
wouldn't
secret.
believe them as they're not. I wouldn't take them as Bible.
But I will say this. We do know how attackers work, right? We know, and we talked about that back door. And that back door, if they went to go reset or go back to information and they had that back door there that was still there, they can still jump into that. So there's, these attackers are not stupid. They make money. This is business. It's a multi-billion-dollar business. So sometimes our first knee-jerk reactions, we're not the first ones to come up with that, right? And they know, they're expecting, they're going to do one of three things, right? And they're waiting for those things. Yep. I think the last piece, we talked about lateral movement. We talked a little bit about, I'm catching myself up in my mind so I don't miss something because we're covering a lot of topics. We talked about how you can kind of sit in there and those different systems may not, or those tools may not pick that up until you decide to move laterally. And usually if you move very slowly, it makes it very hard for them to detect that versus if they move very quickly, because a lot of bad criminal entities are fast, right? They're like, hey man, I'm in, I got it. Let's get domain admin from whoever's got that. Let's move around. Let's find what we can and then get this going. And that is usually to their detriment. If you move very slowly, it becomes a lot harder and to identify essentially. And then what was the second half of the question you had there?
It was just, at what level of incident response plan? I mean, here's where I'm coming from.
Yes.
First of all, just understand from a layman's perspective, as I even listen and I tend to dive all in. I want to learn as much as I can when something like this happens. I'm certainly no expert, but when I hear that, there's floors of people and I could be an individual or a company that's done hundreds of attacks or gotten into hundreds of places. And I was so successful getting into places, it will take me months maybe to get around to all of them. Like what that makes me think of, are we in that much trouble? Are we so poorly prepared? Are the stormtroopers outnumbering the Luke Skywalkers of the world by so many that we're going to be dealing or contending with these awful situations more and more going forward? Secondly, the reality is, the vast majority of dealerships that I know in the United States do not have a certified IT person on their payroll. Most of them are using a third party, and some of those external are very good IT companies. Helion comes to mind. I think they're a fantastic company.
VTech's another one. We work with VTech. All their IT.
VTech is fantastic.
Fantastic, right?
It's John Acosta. Is that VTech?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
John
Acosta he's genius. And so if you guys don't know him, look him up. But John Acosta's great. His company's fantastic. However, that doesn't mean I can abdicate anything as a dealer or as a general manager. That person, is out there and available for me to help them. I need to check, based on what you're saying, whether honestly is going to sound ridiculous, whether I'm paying them enough. And meaning, do I have enough of their services? Do I have the baseline package? Makes me feel good. I can go to sleep at night. But maybe there's more that these companies can do. Obviously, there's a lot more that a company that Black Breach can do. So it just seems to me, if these are the threats, if this is where we are, and if we're likely to continue to have this growth in attacks, last year alone for everybody, nearly 80% more attacks, 3,200 more than the year before. Okay, 3,200 attacks was an 80% increase. We'll likely continue to see this. And so that means, I have to be really paying attention and I have to be committed. And maybe if I don't have that certified IT person, maybe I need a John Acosta, I need a Black Breach, but I also need somebody inside who's going to be eyes and ears all the time, training people and developing response plans. So as we wrap up, I'm a dealer. You're talking to me as a dealer and you're having we're sitting down, we're just having a face-to-face, heart-to-heart. And you're saying, listen, I know there's been all kinds of stuff in the news. People have been talking about all the issues that came out of this. And if you're asking me if there's something you must do, here's what I'm going to tell you. What is that, Justin?
Invest in expertise. Because frankly, there's not one thing. There's no one trick. There's no one magic trick, right? I do not do my own taxes. I hire a CPA. It's like saying, tell me one good thing about doing my taxes. One trick to get, and frankly, no, you hire the correct people. It's the same thing in your sales department, dealers, right? If you said, tell me one good sales trick, it's the same mindset. No, you just need the right team that's doing this. And frankly, it's more cost effective for you. One thing I would like to say, just kind of a quick plug. We're doing a webinar on NADA for NADA on these topics. And it's actually going to be August 6th. It will be John Acosta and myself. Funny enough.
That's a home run. Anybody listening, right? I promise that's a home run. Yeah.
August 6th.
I think the world of John.
And I do too. Very talented. And you'll see the power of the IT security expertise with the cybersecurity expertise and why we speak a lot about what's cost effective, how to save this, because I think a lot of dealers out there are just constantly thinking, oh, this is just bleeding money. And frankly, it's not like that. It's basically taking it and putting it in one throat to choke. And for less than the cost of one employee, you're getting a whole team. That's the way to address that. It's not just by getting one little thing.
This is obviously goes without saying, this has been incredibly interesting. It's been just unbelievably valuable information. So first and foremost, again, Justin, I want to thank you for coming back and giving us even more information. Most importantly, important information on what we can and what we must do moving forward. Even if you don't consider the CDK attack, if you were directly or indirectly affected by it, this is just a reality. People have said this 1,000 times since then. Hey, listen, if it can happen to CDK, it can happen to anybody. And it can happen to anybody. 100%. It will happen. It's not going to happen to everybody, but it can happen to everybody. The likelihood that it happens and the level of damage that it does will have an awful lot to do with the steps that we take as dealers today and going forward. Is that true?
Yes. And I'll tell you why.
Okay.
Because of money. They make, you hit the nail on the head a minute ago, David, of the increase in attacks from year to year to year. That data is readily available, and it's because they have made so much more money each year that people in different parts of the world, now they have an industry to make money that may not need pirating, that may not need, all these different other places that they find themselves. And now working in an office, working on a computer, even though you're doing something criminal, is much better than some other places in criminal industries. And so because of making all that money, you're going to see significant increases in attacks on all sorts of levels. Frankly, we just hear about the ones that are big enough that affect the most. But the reality of it is there is company after company after company that we're dealing with that are affected with this every day, as well as dealers.
On that note, and just to give you some context for everybody listening, just what we know about, an average of 10 companies every day. Every day last year got hit. Chances are it's even more. And we're going to get to a point where it's a company an hour, right? And so it's critically important. Justin, thank you for helping us all to understand this better and what we need to do. For those of you listening, thank you so much for taking the time to listen. I'm confident that you got some value out of this. I certainly trust that's the case. Hope that's the case. Please take the time to share this with dealers, with managers, with other companies so that they can benefit from Justin's expertise. Take the time to go to davidspisak.com and you'll get show notes on this note, including the things that we referenced, including a connection to, I'm going to put a connection to that NADA event coming up on August 6th to make it easy for you guys.
Yeah.
And you could learn more about how you can connect directly with Justin if you want to continue to level up the security, the cybersecurity in your business. So with that, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next time on the David Spisak Show. Thanks so much.